No maid survived a single day with the billionaire's twin daughters. He was shocked when the new maid did this. Before we start, if you'd like, you can tell us which country you're watching from. Please hit the like button if you're enjoying this content and subscribe to our channel to stay updated. The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the Beverly Hills mansion. 6-year-old Emma Mitchell stood frozen beside her twin Lily, both pairs of blue eyes wide with defiance and fear. "Girls!" James Mitchell's voice boomed from his office, where he'd been trying to salvage his conference call with Tokyo investors. This was the 13th nanny in 6 months. Mrs. Henderson had lasted exactly 47 minutes before storming out, muttering about impossible children. James rounded the corner to find his daughters amid the wreckage of Victoria's favorite vase, a wedding gift from her Italian grandmother. His heart clenched. Victoria had been gone exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. "We didn't mean to," Emma whispered, though there was no real remorse in her tone. She'd learned that chaos was the only way to get attention in a house grown too quiet since Mommy went to heaven. "That's what you said about Mrs. Peterson's car keys and flooding the guest bathroom," James replied, exhaustion bleeding through his anger. The doorbell chimed, 10:47 a.m., right on time, right on. The woman on his doorstep wasn't what he'd expected. Sarah Coleman appeared to be in her late 20s, with auburn hair and kind brown eyes. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, nothing like the uniformed professionals the agency usually sent. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Coleman from the agency." Behind him, another crash echoed from the living room. Sarah's eyebrows raised, but she didn't flinch. "They're spirited," James said weakly, preparing for her inevitable retreat. "I read about the 13 previous nannies," Sarah said gently. "And about your wife. I'm sorry for your loss." Something in her tone made him look closer. Real understanding, not just professional sympathy. Another crash, followed by water hitting hardwood floors. "May I?" Sarah asked, stepping past him toward the destruction. James hurried after her, dreading what they'd find. But when they reached the kitchen, Sarah was already kneeling beside the twins, amid overturned water and scattered drawers, examining Emma's scraped knee. "That must hurt," Sarah said softly. "Did you fall reaching for something?" Emma nodded, tears threatening. "I was getting band-aids for Lily. She cut her finger on the glass." Sarah efficiently located the first aid kit. "When I was your age, I had a little sister who got into trouble too. She taught me that big messes usually mean big feelings that don't know how to come out." James watched in stunned silence as his daughters, his impossible daughters, listened to every word. "What happened to your sister?" Emma asked. Sarah's hands stilled briefly. "She went to heaven when she was 6, just like you are now. But she taught me that sometimes when people are sad or scared, they do things that seem naughty when they're really trying to say, 'Help me.'" The silence that followed was different from any James had heard since Victoria died. It was full of possibility. 2 hours later, James stood watching Sarah sit cross-legged with Emma and Lily, building an elaborate blanket fort. The cleanup had become a game where they were brave knights restoring the castle. It had been exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days since the drunk driver ran that red light. Victoria died instantly. The girls survived with minor bruises, physical ones anyway. "Daddy, look!" Emma pointed proudly at their fortress. "Miss Sarah taught us about load-bearing walls and working together." "They're natural engineers," Sarah told James. "Very creative problem solvers." That's one way to put it," James replied, thinking of their elaborate schemes to drive away caregivers. "Actually, I'd like to discuss their creative problem-solving," Sarah said, standing. "Could we speak privately?" James felt his stomach tighten. Here came the polite explanation of why she couldn't stay. "Girls practice reading in the fort," Sarah suggested. "I left some books in there." To James's amazement, both twins obeyed without argument. Let me guess, James said in his study. You've realized this position isn't what you expected. Sarah tilted her head. Actually, I was going to say your daughters are remarkable girls who found an effective way to protect themselves from being abandoned again. James blinked. I'm sorry, what? They're not bad children, Mr. Mitchell. They're scared children. Every adult who's supposed to care for them leaves. From their perspective, it's safer to control the leaving. The words hit like a physical blow. I would never abandon them, but you're gone 12 hours a day. When you are home, you're exhausted by their behavior. They don't see a father who loves them. They see another adult who finds them too difficult. Victoria always handled. She was so good with them, I don't know how to. Grief doesn't come with instructions, but those girls need to know they're safe, loved, and that people in their lives aren't going anywhere. From the living room came actual reading voices, blending like summer afternoons when Victoria was alive. Why are you different? James asked suddenly. Why didn't you run? Sarah was quiet. Because I know what it's like to lose someone you can't live without, and I know what it's like to be a little girl who thinks it's her fault. The next morning, James woke to genuine laughter from the kitchen. He found Sarah at the stove wearing one of Victoria's old aprons, while Emma and Lily sat with flour in their hair and matching grins. We're making butterfly pancakes, Emma announced, holding up a lumpy creation. Miss Sarah remembered that Mama loved butterflies. James's breath caught. How did you know about the butterflies? The girls mentioned them yesterday, Sarah explained. They have beautiful memories of their mother. It seemed wrong not to celebrate those. As Sarah flipped perfect butterfly-shaped pancakes, James realized she'd somehow learned more about his family in 24 hours than some nannies had in weeks. Miss Sarah had a little sister too, Emma said. Her sister went to heaven like Mama. Sarah, I'm so sorry. It was 3 years ago, Sarah said quietly. Holly was 6 when she died. Emma and Lily were telling me how much they miss their mother. I told them it's okay to miss people and still find ways to be happy. The similarity hit James hard. Sarah had lost a 6-year-old sister. No wonder she understood his daughters so intuitively. Did it hurt when she went to heaven? Emma asked with innocent directness. Yes, very much. It still hurts sometimes. But I learned that love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes shape. Like how a butterfly used to be a caterpillar, but it's still the same beautiful creature. Is that why you're not scared of us? Lily asked. I'm not scared because you're not scary. You're just sad. And sad doesn't equal bad. The kitchen fell quiet except for gentle sizzling and eating sounds. James watched his daughters and saw what Sarah had seen immediately. Not monsters, but little girls navigating an uncertain world. I have to go to the office, he said reluctantly. Actually, Sarah said, I was hoping you might stay home today. The girls and I planned a project and they'd love your help. I have meetings. Please, Daddy. Emma's voice was hopeful. Miss Sarah says we're planting flowers in the garden for butterflies to come back. The garden, Victoria's garden he'd destroyed in his grief. I don't think... Sometimes the hardest things are the most important things, Sarah said softly. Sometimes we need to be brave enough to let beautiful things grow again. James looked at his daughters' expectant faces, at the kitchen that felt like home again. The Singapore deal could wait. Let's plant some flowers, he said. The cheer from his daughters was worth more than any business deal. By afternoon, James's suit was replaced by old jeans, his hands black with soil. Emma carefully placed purple petunias, while Lily and Sarah worked with orange marigolds. Mama said butterflies were like flying flowers, Emma said seriously. She said they visit when people need to remember that beautiful things can happen after sad things. James had forgotten Victoria said that, forgotten Victoria. Sitting in the dirt with his daughters, the memories felt like gifts instead of wounds. Your mama was wise, Sarah said. What else did she tell you? She said they spend time in the dark before they can fly, Lily added. Being in the dark doesn't mean you're broken, just changing into something better. James felt his eyes burn. When had his daughters become so insightful? She also said butterflies find each other even far apart because love makes invisible paths only hearts can see. That's beautiful, Sarah said softly. She sounds amazing. She was, both twins said together, then smiled. The first genuine smile James had seen between them since the accident. How do you know so much about gardening? James asked as Sarah demonstrated proper planting depth. My sister and I helped our grandmother. After I lost Holly, working with growing things became a way to feel close to her. There's something healing about helping life take root. How long have you been working with families? Sarah's hands paused. This is actually my first placement through the agency. Before this, I taught preschool in Georgia. When my grandmother passed last month, I needed a change. So we're your first nanny job? James felt panic spike. She was inexperienced. Miss Sarah knows about taking care of kids, Emma said, sensing his distress. She took care of her sister. Emma, Sarah said gently, remember what we discussed about private stories. But James caught the careful blankness on Sarah's face. There was more to the story about Holly. Are you going to leave when you get tired of us? Lily asked suddenly. The question hit James harder than any crisis. His daughter was already preparing for abandonment. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah said firmly. Being sad isn't naughty, and I wouldn't leave you for feeling your feelings. Promise? Emma asked. Sarah looked directly at James. I promise. Your family needs someone who understands that healing takes time. As they cleaned tools and headed inside, James found himself believing her. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself hope. He had no idea Sarah Coleman had secrets that would soon threaten everything she'd just promised. That evening, after minimal bedtime fuss and butterfly stories, James found Sarah cleaning dinner dishes. Victoria's kitchen had always been chaotic when she cooked, but Sarah's approach was organized, yet warm. You don't have to do that, James said, picking up a towel. Cleaning isn't part of your job. Cooking for people I care about never feels like work, Sarah replied. People she cared about. The phrase sent unexpected warmth through James's chest. Sarah, about this being your first nanny position, why did you leave teaching? Her hands stilled in soapy water. Sometimes life forces changes you hadn't planned. Sometimes familiar places become too painful. James recognized the deflection. He'd used similar ones about holding up after Victoria's death. The girls mentioned you took care of Holly before she passed. Sarah turned off water and dried her hands slowly. Holly wasn't just my sister. After our parents died when I was 18, I became her guardian. She was 4 then. I raised her for 2 years before. You lost your parents and your sister. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Holly got sick, Sarah continued steadily but fragile. The treatments, hospitals, hope and disappointment lasted 6 months. She died just after her 6th birthday. The magnitude of her loss hit James like a blow. She'd been mother to Holly, raising her from toddlerhood only to lose her. Is that why you came to California? I couldn't bear teaching other people's healthy children when my own was gone. Every playground laugh felt like salt in a wound. Then why take a job caring for children at all? Sarah smiled through tears. Because yesterday, seeing Emma and Lily acting out their grief, I saw Holly. Not sick Holly, but the Holly who built forts and asked impossible questions. I saw children who needed someone to understand their behavior wasn't the problem. Their pain was. What happened with your last teaching job, the real reason you left? Sarah's face crumpled. I had a breakdown. A student, Madison, reminded me of Holly. Same age, same laugh. When Madison scraped her knee and cried for her mommy. Sarah's voice broke. I completely lost it. right there in front of everyone. That must have been terrifying. I was placed on leave while they evaluated my fitness to work with children, so I left Georgia and saw your listing. Something called to me. What was it? The caseworker mentioned your daughters drove away caregivers. They seemed determined to make sure no one stayed. I thought, those sound like children terrified of abandonment. Odi, maybe I could help them feel safe enough to stop protecting themselves from love. Upstairs. Miss Sarah, Emma had a bad dream about butterflies that couldn't fly. Sarah headed for the stairs, then looked back. For what it's worth, I don't think you're failing them. You're all learning to be a family differently than planned. That takes time. Watching her climb stairs to comfort his daughters, James realized Sarah wasn't just a nanny good with difficult children. She was someone who'd lived through unimaginable loss and chosen to use that experience to help other broken families heal. Could he trust someone who might understand his pain better than he understood it himself? 3 weeks later, James watched from his office as Emma and Lily examined their butterfly garden with Sarah, studying something with scientific intensity. "James, are you listening?" His sister-in-law's sharp voice cut through his distraction. "I think it's time we discussed the girls' long-term care." Margaret Harrison had been calling with increasing frequency since learning about Sarah. As the twins' only surviving blood relative, she'd appointed herself their protector, mainly by criticizing James's parenting decisions. "Their care is fine, Margaret. They're thriving." "Thriving? James, you hired a complete stranger. Do you know this woman's actual background? She's not a stranger anymore. She's been here 3 weeks, and the girls have never been happier." He paused as Emma shrieked with joy. Through the window, he saw an orange and black butterfly on Lily's finger. "That's what worries me. Rapid attachments to unstable caregivers." "Sarah is not unstable. She's patient, kind, and the girls adore her. Children attach to anyone showing attention. I'm coming this weekend. I want to meet this miracle worker myself." The line went dead. James stared at the phone, dread settling in his stomach. Margaret had a way of finding problems where none existed. Emma and Lily burst through his door, vibrating with excitement. "Daddy, the first butterfly came," Emma shouted. "It's orange and black, like a tiny tiger," Lily added, grabbing his hand. "Miss Sarah knows all about them." James was dragged to the garden, where Sarah knelt beside a notebook, sketching the butterfly resting on a marigold. "Look," Sarah said softly, "she's a female monarch, probably resting during migration. The girls named her Victoria." Victoria. Of course they had. His wife would have loved this moment. "Is she going to stay?" Emma asked worriedly. "Monarchs are travelers," Sarah explained. "She'll rest here, enjoy our flowers, then continue her journey. But now she knows this is safe, so she might return, and she'll tell other butterflies about our good garden." James realized Sarah wasn't just talking about the butterfly. She was talking about trust, safety proven over time. "Miss Sarah," Lily said seriously, "are you a traveler too?" Sarah looked at James before answering. "I'm not a traveler, sweetheart. I'm more like a gardener. I find places where beautiful things can grow, then stay to tend them." Kneeling in dirt, watching Monarch Victoria explore their garden, James felt something shift. For 3 weeks he'd waited for Sarah to reveal fatal flaws or decide his family was too much work. But looking at her now, absorbed in his daughter's wonder, he realized she meant it. She was planning to stay. When Margaret arrived this weekend with suspicious questions, would Sarah still feel welcome? Or would his sister-in-law's arrival finally drive away the first person who'd made his house feel like home since Victoria died? The butterfly lifted off, circling them once, before flying toward the setting sun. Emma and Lily cheered, but James held his breath, hoping this wasn't an omen of another departure. Margaret arrived Saturday morning like a storm, her silver Mercedes pulling into the driveway with military precision. James watched his sister-in-law emerge, platinum hair perfect despite October breeze, designer suit stark against the casual atmosphere Sarah had created. "She looks scary," Emma whispered from behind the sofa, where she and Lily had been reading with Sarah. The doorbell rang expensively. James opened it to find Margaret already cataloguing the entryway with appraiser's eyes. "James," she said, air-kissing without warmth, "you look tired. Please come in." He gestured toward the living room where Sarah had risen, smoothing her sweater nervously. "Girls, come give Aunt Margaret a hug." Emma and Lily exchanged glances, but approached for obligatory embraces, immediately stepping back toward Sarah afterward. "And you must be the famous Sarah," Margaret said, smile sharp as a blade. "I've heard so much." "Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Harrison," Sarah replied, extending her hand. "The girls have shared wonderful stories about their aunt." "I'm sure they have." Margaret's handshake was brief and assessing. "Tell me, what exactly qualifies you for caring for traumatized children?" James felt his stomach drop. They hadn't even reached the living room. "I have a bachelor's in early childhood education and 4 years of classroom experience," Sarah answered evenly. "But more importantly, I understand what these children are experiencing. Understanding and qualification aren't the same. Have you had specific training in grief counseling, child psychology, behavioral management?" "La, Margaret," James warned, "I'm concerned about my niece's well-being. They need stability, not experimental methods." Emma tugged Sarah's sweater. "Miss Sarah isn't experimenting. She knows how to help us feel better." "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret said condescendingly. "Children often think adults are helping even when they're not." Sarah's face went pale, hands trembling before she clasped them behind her back. As they settled in the living room, Margaret's interrogation continued with prosecutorial precision. Where had Sarah worked? Why had she left? What were her career goals? Each question probed for weakness. "I find it curious that someone with your education would choose nannying over teaching. What aren't you telling us about leaving Georgia?" Sarah's composure cracked. "I left because I needed change. Sometimes life forces difficult decisions." "What kind of difficult decisions?" "Professional conduct issues." "That's enough," James said sharply. "I should check on dinner," Sarah said quietly, standing carefully. "Excuse me." As Sarah disappeared, Margaret turned triumphantly. "She's hiding something, I knew it." "You knew nothing. You walked in, determined to find fault." "I'm protecting my nieces. That woman has secrets. Big ones." From the kitchen came running water and muffled movement, but underneath, James thought he heard someone trying not to cry. "Girls, help Miss Sarah with dinner," he said gently. Alone with Margaret's accusations, James felt growing doubts. What if Margaret was right? What if Sarah was hiding something dangerous? "I'm hiring a private investigator," Margaret announced. "If you won't protect those children, I will." "You're not hiring anyone. Sarah is family now." "Family? James, you've known her 3 weeks. She's the help, not family. If you can't see the difference, perhaps we need alternative arrangements for the girls' care." The threat hung like poison. Margaret had money, influence, blood ties. If she decided Sarah was dangerous, she could make legal trouble. From the kitchen came Emma's laughter, followed by Lily asking Sarah about their recipe. Normal sounds, happy sounds, the sounds of a family. James looked at Margaret's satisfied expression and realized he had a choice. Protect the fragile happiness Sarah brought, or let Margaret's suspicions destroy it. "Get out," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon." "Get out of my house, Margaret. Don't come back until you can treat Sarah with respect." Margaret's face went white, then red. "You'll regret this, James. When that woman's secrets come to light, you'll remember this conversation." She gathered her purse and headed for the door. "Goodbye, girls. Aunt Margaret will see you soon." As the door slammed, James slumped against the wall, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or finally done something right. Monday morning brought a manila envelope that felt like a bomb. James stared at it for an hour before opening the private investigator's report Margaret had commissioned. The contents were devastating. Sarah Elizabeth Coleman had left Sunshine Preschool in Savannah under circumstances requiring administrative review. The euphemistic language painted a picture of emotional instability, inappropriate attachment to students, concerns about psychological fitness. Witness statements described erratic behavior and excessive emotional responses. A formal complaint from Madison Parker's mother alleged Sarah had completely lost control during a playground incident. But the medical records stopped James's heart. Sarah had been hospitalized for a psychological crisis 2 weeks before leaving Georgia. The notes mentioned severe depression, complicated grief, and potential risk to self. James set the report down with shaking hands. Upstairs, he could hear Sarah helping the twins prepare for school, their voices bright with happiness. How could the broken woman in this report be the same person who'd brought joy to his daughters? That evening, James waited until the twins were asleep before confronting Sarah in the kitchen. She was preparing tomorrow's lunches, humming as she cut sandwiches into butterfly shapes. "Sarah, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her freeze. She turned slowly, face already pale with apprehension. James pulled the report from behind his back. Sarah went completely white, recognizing the letterhead. "Margaret hired someone to investigate your background. I want to hear your side." Sarah gripped the counter, knuckles white. "What does it say?" "It says you were hospitalized for a breakdown, complaints about your behavior with students. That you left teaching because parents questioned your fitness to work with children." James's voice was controlled, but she heard the hurt. "Is any of that true?" Sarah stood there, breathing shallow and rapid, then slowly nodded. "Yes, all of it." The admission hit like a physical blow, even expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you never would have hired me. No one wants someone labeled unstable, regardless of circumstances." "The circumstances matter, Sarah. Tell me what really happened." Sarah sank into a chair, trembling. "After Holly died, I threw myself into teaching because being around children made me feel close to her. But Madison joined my class, so much like Holly. Same age, laugh, way of saying my name. I thought I could handle it." She wiped her eyes. "Then Madison fell off playground equipment, just a scraped knee. But when she cried for her mommy, something inside me broke. I saw Holly in that hospital bed calling for me, and I lost it completely. Couldn't breathe, think. Other teachers had to remove me." James felt his anger deflate, replaced by sadness for what Sarah had endured. "And the hospitalization?" 2 weeks later, I tried to." Sarah's voice broke completely. "I couldn't see any reason to keep going without her. My neighbor found me and called 911. Sarah had been suicidal. She'd been so broken by grief, she'd seen no way forward. And James had invited her around his vulnerable daughters without knowing this. I spent 3 days in psychiatric ward, medication, therapy, promises to call if I felt that way again. When released, I knew I couldn't return to teaching, couldn't risk another breakdown around children. "Oh, but you came here, took a job caring for children anyway." Sarah looked up desperately, because Emma and Lily needed someone who understood their pain. For the first time since Holly died, I felt like I had purpose again. Taking care of them doesn't feel like work. It feels like healing. James studied her face, searching for signs of instability, but all he saw was a woman broken by loss and slowly rebuilding through love. "Are you still taking medication?" "Yes. Antidepressants. I have them if you want to see." "And therapy?" Weekly video sessions with Dr. Martinez in Georgia. She knows about this job, about Emma and Lily. She thinks the work is good for me, with healthy boundaries. James was quiet, processing everything. Finally, "Do you think you're a danger to my daughters?" "No," Sarah said immediately, voice steady for the first time. "I would never hurt them. I would die before letting anything happen to them." James believed her. Despite the report, despite Margaret's warnings, despite every rational reason for concern, he believed her. But belief and trust weren't the same thing. "I need time to think about this." Sarah nodded, tears streaming. "I understand. I'll start looking for another position." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Sarah stood slowly, moving like someone much older. "I'll give you 2 weeks' notice. That should be enough time to find someone else." As she walked toward the stairs, James felt something tear inside his chest. He was about to lose the first person who'd made his family whole since Victoria died, and he didn't know how to stop it. The accident happened Tuesday morning. 1 week after James discovered Sarah's secret, the twins had been subdued all week, sensing tension but unable to understand its source. Sarah had been professional but distant, already pulling back emotionally. James had spent 7 sleepless nights wrestling with his decision. The investigators' report warring with daily observations of Sarah's gentle care. The morning started normally. Sarah made butterfly pancakes while twins got dressed, their chatter subdued. James was on a call with his attorney about Singapore when he heard the crash. Not the usual childhood mischief sound, this was different, sharper, more violent, followed immediately by Emma's terrified scream. He dropped the phone and ran, finding chaos in the kitchen. Lily was on the floor, blood streaming from her forehead, face pale with shock. Emma knelt beside her, crying hysterically, while Sarah pressed a kitchen towel to Lily's wound, with visibly shaking hands. "What happened?" James demanded, kneeling beside Lily. "She fell," Sarah said, voice tight with controlled panic. Trying to reach the top shelf and the step stool slipped. She hit the granite counter corner. James took over, applying pressure while Sarah got the first aid kit. The cut was deep, bleeding heavily, and Lily's eyes had a glassy quality that sent terror through his chest. "We need the hospital," he said, scooping Lily up. "Emma, get your shoes. Now." The emergency room was a blur of triage nurses, forms, waiting. Lily needed 12 stitches, but the scan showed no concussion signs. She'd been lucky. A few inches left could have been catastrophic. Only after Lily was stitched and resting did Emma finally speak. "It's my fault," she whispered, tears streaming. "I dared her to reach the cookie jar. I said she was too scared." But when the social worker arrived for mandatory interview, Emma's story changed. "Miss Sarah wasn't watching us," she said, voice small but clear. "She was on the phone and wasn't paying attention when Lily climbed up." James felt the world tilt. He looked at Sarah, who'd gone completely white, face stricken with guilt and confusion. "Emma, that's not—" Sarah started. "I saw you," Emma insisted, looking at her father instead of Sarah. "You were talking to someone and not watching us like you're supposed to." The social worker, Ms. Chen, made careful notes asking gentle but probing questions. Previous incidents, proper supervision. Concerns about caregivers' attention to safety. James found himself in an impossible position. He knew Emma was lying. He'd seen Sarah focused entirely on the twins earlier, but he also knew why Emma was lying. Children often lied when feeling guilty. The question was, why blame Sarah instead of accepting responsibility? The answer hit like a punch. Emma was protecting herself the only way she knew, by pushing away the adult she was afraid of losing. If Sarah was at fault, dangerous, then Sarah leaving wouldn't be abandonment. It would be protection. "Miss Coleman," Miss Chen said, "walk me through exactly what happened." Sarah's voice was steady, but hands trembled as she explained. She'd been making lunch, twins playing quietly, heard the step stool scrape and turned just in time to see Lily fall. And you weren't distracted? On a phone call? No, Sarah said firmly. I was making sandwiches. I wasn't on the phone. Miss Chen looked between Emma's accusations and Sarah's denials, clearly trying to determine truth. Finally, she turned to James. Mr. Mitchell, given circumstances and conflicting accounts, I'm required to recommend Miss Coleman be temporarily suspended, pending full investigation. Child Protective Services will need to— No. James's voice cut through official language like a blade. That won't be necessary. Mr. Mitchell, when there are supervision questions, there are no questions, James said firmly. Emma, tell Ms. Chen the truth. All of it. Emma's face crumpled. Daddy, The truth, sweetheart. What really happened? For a moment, Emma just cried. Then slowly, haltingly, the real story emerged. She dared Lily to reach the cookie jar. Sarah had told them not to climb, but Emma called Lily a baby. When Lily fell, Emma was so scared and guilty she needed someone else to blame. I thought if it was Miss Sarah's fault, she'd have to go away, and then she couldn't leave us like the others did, Emma sobbed. But I don't want her to go. I want her to stay forever. Ms. Chen finished paperwork with a notation about the child recanting. The investigation would be closed, but there would be a flag in the system. Driving home from the hospital, Lily sleeping against Sarah's shoulder and Emma curled with shame, James realized something profound had happened. When forced to choose between protecting himself legally and protecting Sarah from false accusations, he'd chosen Sarah. He'd chosen to trust her completely, even when it carried real risks. The question was, after everything that happened, would Sarah choose to stay? That night, after Lily was settled with extra pillows and instructions to call if dizzy, James found Sarah on the back porch overlooking their butterfly garden. She'd been there over an hour, staring at flowers they'd planted together, arms wrapped around her knees like armor. She's sleeping comfortably, James said, settling beside her. The doctor said she'll be fine. Sarah nodded but didn't look at him. I should have watched more carefully, should have anticipated they might climb. Sarah, stop. Emma dared her to climb. You told them not to. What happened was an accident, not negligence. That social worker didn't believe me. She believed you after Emma told the truth. Sarah finally looked at him, eyes red with unshed tears. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I shouldn't work with children. One accident, one moment of imperfect supervision, and suddenly I'm the unstable caregiver who can't be trusted. Is that why you didn't tell me about your breakdown? Because you thought one bad moment defined your ability to care for children? Sarah's laugh was bitter. It wasn't one bad moment, James. I had a complete psychological collapse. I was so broken I wanted to die. How is that not relevant to caring for vulnerable children? James was quiet, choosing words carefully. Can I tell you something about the day Victoria died? Sarah looked surprised but nodded. I was supposed to pick up the girls from swimming that day. Victoria asked me to because she wanted to grocery shop. But I had a meeting that ran late, so I called and asked if she could get them instead. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood where this was going. If I had left that meeting when supposed to, Victoria would never have been at that intersection at 3:47 p.m. when that drunk driver ran the red light. She'd be alive today. The girls would have their mother. Our family would be whole. James. For 2 years I've carried guilt of that decision. Wondered if my inability to leave work early made me responsible for my wife's death and daughter's trauma. Do you think that makes me unfit to care for them? Sarah shook her head, tears flowing freely. Grief does terrible things to our minds. Makes us blame ourselves for things beyond our control. Makes us feel like we don't deserve happiness because we failed to protect people we cared about most. But feeling that way doesn't make us dangerous. It makes us human. You never tried to hurt yourself. No, but I wanted to disappear. There were nights I stood in my office thinking how much easier it would be if I just stopped existing, if the girls could be raised by someone who hadn't failed their mother so completely. Sarah stared in shock. "You never said, because admitting that darkness feels like defeat. But the truth is, we're both survivors of devastating loss. We both carry guilt that doesn't logically belong to us. And we've both found ways to honor people we couldn't save by caring for people we can." They sat in silence, watching the last butterflies visit their garden in fading light. Finally, Sarah spoke. "There's something else. Something I never told anyone." James waited, sensing importance. "The day Holly died, I wasn't at the hospital. I'd been there 3 straight days, and nurses convinced me to go home and shower. They said she was stable, that I should take care of myself. So I left." Sarah's voice broke. "She died 20 minutes after I walked out of her room. 20 minutes. She was alone." "Sarah, I've spent 3 years believing that if I'd stayed, if I'd been holding her hand, maybe she would have fought harder, maybe she would have held on. Maybe doctors would have tried something different if they'd seen how much she meant to someone." James felt his heart break for her. "Do you think Holly would blame you for taking care of yourself?" "No," Sarah whispered, "but I blamed myself. I still blame myself." "And is that why you were so determined to save Emma and Lily? To prove you could protect children better than you protected Holly?" Sarah's sob was answer enough. James reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "Holly didn't die because you weren't there, Sarah. She died because sometimes children get sick, and there's nothing anyone can do. Just like Victoria didn't die because I was late to a meeting. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's no one to blame. How do you live with that? How do you accept that level of powerlessness? You focus on what you can control. You love people in front of you as completely as possible. You build butterfly gardens and make butterfly pancakes and teach little girls that love doesn't disappear just because people do." Sarah laughed through tears. "Is that what I've been doing?" "That's exactly what you've been doing. And Emma and Lily are better for it. I'm better for it." As last light faded from the sky, James realized something profound had just happened. They'd both shared their deepest shames, most devastating secrets, and instead of driving them apart, truth had brought them closer. For the first time since Victoria's death, James felt like he wasn't carrying his grief alone. The question was, what came next? Margaret's return came 3 days later, announced by her car door slam and sharp heel staccato on the walkway. James watched her march toward the house, face set, in determined expression of someone who'd come to settle scores. "She looks really mad," Emma observed, pressing closer to his side. "Where's Miss Sarah?" Lily asked, hand automatically touching her forehead bandage. "Upstairs, helping with laundry," James replied, though he suspected Sarah would hear Margaret's arrival and stay conveniently out of sight. The doorbell's chime was sharp and impatient. "Stay here, girls," James instructed, opening the door to find Margaret with phone already in hand and thick folder under her arm. "I heard about the accident," she said without preamble, pushing past him. "Lily could have been killed, James. Killed because that woman wasn't properly supervising. That's not what happened, isn't it? A child in her care suffered serious head injury, requiring emergency surgery. 12 stitches, James corrected. And it was an accident. Accidents happen when supervision is lacking." Margaret opened her folder, pulling out papers. "I've been in contact with Child and Family Services. Given Miss Coleman's psychological instability and now this incident, I'm petitioning for emergency custody of the girls." The words hit like a physical blow. "Your what?" "I've spoken to my attorney. The combination of her previous breakdown, suspicious circumstances of this accident, and your clear inability to make rational decisions creates a dangerous situation for Emma and Lily." "Aunt Margaret, no!" Emma's voice was small but fierce as she ran to James's side. "Miss Sarah didn't do anything wrong. I lied about it. Margaret knelt to Emma's level, expression softening. "Sweetheart, sometimes when adults scare us, we feel like we have to protect them by changing our stories. But you don't have to protect Miss Sarah. That's Aunt Margaret's job. You're not listening." Lily appeared at the stairs top, bandaged forehead making her look fragile, but voice strong with conviction. "We told Daddy the truth. Miss Sarah told us not to climb, and I did it anyway because Emma dared me." "Girls, why don't you play in your room while adults talk?" Margaret suggested, but neither twin moved. "No," Emma said firmly. "This is about our family. We get to have a say." James felt pride surge at his daughter's courage, but Margaret's legal threat hung like a sword. Could she actually get custody? Did she have enough evidence to convince a judge his home was unsafe? "Margaret, you're upset about Lily getting hurt, I understand. But taking the girls away from their home isn't going to—" "Their home?" Margaret's laugh was harsh. "James, their home died with their mother. What they have now is a house run by a mentally unstable stranger and a father too blinded by loneliness to see danger." The accusation about his loneliness hit uncomfortably close to home, but before James could respond, Sarah's voice cut through tension. "You're absolutely right." Everyone turned to see Sarah standing at the stairs bottom, face pale but composed. She'd changed into her nicest dress and pulled her hair back professionally, as if preparing for a job interview. "Miss Sarah!" Both twins ran to her, but she gently guided them back toward James. "Mrs. Harrison is right about several things," Sarah continued, voice steady despite hand tremors. "I do have a history of psychological instability. I did suffer a complete breakdown after losing my sister, and yesterday a child in my care was seriously injured." "Sarah, don't—" James started, but she held up a hand. "I think it's time everyone knew the complete truth," Sarah said, looking directly at Margaret. "About my sister, Holly. About why I really came to California. About why I'll never let anything happen to Emma and Lily." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" Sarah took a deep breath, gathering courage for something that clearly terrified her. "Holly didn't die of illness," she said quietly. "Holly was murdered." The silence was deafening. Even the twins seemed to sense something monumental happening. "What?" James's voice was barely a whisper. "Holly was killed by our stepfather, the man who was supposed to protect her after our parents died." Sarah's voice was steady now, as if telling truth had given her strength. "I'd been fighting for custody for months because I suspected he was hurting her. The bruises, the fear, the way she flinched when adults moved too quickly. But I was only 21, working 2 jobs, living in a studio apartment. Every lawyer said courts would never give custody to a young single woman over an established married couple." Margaret's folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering. "The night Holly died, she called me crying, begging me to come get her, but I was working a double shift at the hospital, trying to save money for lawyer fees. I told her to lock her bedroom door, and I'd come in the morning." Sarah's voice broke. "He killed her that night. Beat her to death because she'd threatened to tell someone what he'd been doing." James felt the room spin. "Sarah, so yes, Mrs. Harrison, I had a psychological breakdown. I blame myself for not saving her. I tried to kill myself because I couldn't live with knowing I'd failed the one person who depended on me most." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears, but voice unwavering. "But I learned something in therapy. I learned that loving someone enough to die for them isn't the same as loving them enough to live for them." She looked at Emma and Lily, who were staring with wide, understanding eyes. "I came here because these girls reminded me of Holly. Not the Holly who died, but the Holly who lived. The Holly who built forts and asked impossible questions and deserved to be protected by someone who would never ever give up on her." Sarah's voice strengthened. "And I will never give up on Emma and Lily. I will never stop fighting for their safety, their happiness, their right to be children who are loved unconditionally." Margaret's face had gone completely white. "You never told the agency any of this." "No, I didn't. Because the agency would have seen family violence history and suicide attempt and never looked deeper. They wouldn't have seen someone who understands what it means to be a child who's lost everything. They wouldn't have seen someone who would die before letting anything happen to the children in her care." James stared at Sarah, seeing her with completely new eyes. She hadn't just survived losing her sister. She'd survived failing to protect her from someone who should have kept her safe. The guilt she carried wasn't just about grief. It was about a very real failure that had cost a child's life. But instead of being destroyed by that failure, she'd found a way to transform it into the most fierce, protective love he'd ever witnessed. "Miss Sarah," Emma said quietly, "is that why you're so good at taking care of us? Because you couldn't take care of Holly?" Sarah knelt to meet Emma's eyes. "I'm good at taking care of you because you deserve to be taken care of. Because every child deserves to feel safe and loved and protected. And because I learned that the best way to honor someone you've lost is to love someone you can save." Margaret was gathering scattered papers with shaking hands. "This doesn't change anything. If anything, it proves you're too emotionally involved." "It changes everything," James said quietly. "It means Sarah isn't just our nanny. She's our guardian angel." 6 months later, James stood in the same butterfly garden where Sarah had first shown Emma and Lily that love could take new shapes without disappearing. Orange and black monarchs had returned with spring weather, joined by painted ladies, swallowtails, and dozens of other species drawn to carefully tended flowers. Today, however, the garden had been transformed for a different gathering. White chairs in neat rows, an archway covered in the same butterfly flowers that had started it all, and a small group of people who had become their chosen family. "Daddy, are you ready?" Emma asked, tugging his sleeve. She wore a yellow dress Victoria would have loved, with a crown of baby's breath she'd insisted on making herself. "Miss Sarah looks really pretty," Lily added, peering around the house corner where Sarah was making final adjustments to her simple white dress. James straightened his tie and nodded. "I'm ready." The past 6 months had been a gradual dance of healing and discovery. After Margaret's failed custody bid, dismissed immediately once the full truth about Sarah's background emerged, the family had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and miraculous. Sarah had officially become the girl's legal guardian alongside James through a process that took 4 months and resulted in papers that made her their protector as well as their caregiver. The proposal had happened in this same garden on a February morning when Lily asked why Miss Sarah couldn't be their real mum if she loved them like a real mum did. Sarah had started explaining complicated adult concepts when James had simply said she could be if she wanted to. The wanting, it turned out, was mutual. "Dearly beloved," the minister began as Sarah walked down the makeshift aisle between butterfly bushes, "we are gathered to celebrate the union of James and Sarah and the creation of a family born not from circumstance, but from choice." James watched Sarah approach, seeing not just the woman he'd fallen in love with, but the guardian angel who had saved his daughters and, in the process, saved him. Her eyes were bright with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "The couple has written their own vows," the minister continued. James took Sarah's hands, feeling their slight tremor from happiness rather than fear. "Sarah, 6 months ago, you walked into our lives and saw 3 broken people drowning in grief. You didn't see problems to be fixed or behaviors to be managed. You saw a family that just needed someone brave enough to love us back to life." He paused, looking at Emma and Lily, standing beside them as junior bridesmaids, faces radiant with joy. "You taught my daughters that love doesn't end when people die. It just changes shape. You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but finding ways to honor our losses while still choosing happiness. And you showed all of us that sometimes the best families aren't born. They're built by people who choose to stay, even when staying is hard. Sarah squeezed his hands, tears flowing freely. I promise to love you not despite your scars, but because they prove how strong you are. I promise to help you tend the garden of our life together, knowing that the most beautiful flowers often grow from the darkest soil. And I promise that no matter what comes, we'll face it together, as a family that chose each other and chooses each other every day. Sarah, the minister prompted. Sarah looked at James, then at Emma and Lily, then back at the man who had given her a reason to live again. James, Emma, Lily, you taught me that love isn't something that happens to you, it's something you do. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, you choose to create a family. You choose to see the best in each other. You choose to forgive mistakes and celebrate victories and build something beautiful together. She paused, voice strengthening. I spent 3 years believing I wasn't worthy of happiness because I'd failed to save someone I loved. But you taught me that the way to honor Holly isn't to punish myself forever. It's to love other children so completely that she would be proud. Emma and Lily, I promise to be the mother Holly would want you to have. James, I promise to be the partner Victoria would want you to find. And I promise all of you that I will never stop choosing this family, this love, this life we're building together. As they exchanged rings, simple bands engraved with "Love changes shape," Emma tugged on Sarah's dress. Miss Sarah, she whispered, can we call you Mom now? Sarah knelt to hug both girls, her wedding dress spreading around them like wings. You can call me whatever feels right in your heart. Mom, Lily said decisively, we want to call you Mom. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by their small gathering of friends and dozens of butterflies that seemed to dance around them in celebration. Later, as the reception wound down and twins chased fireflies in growing dusk, James found himself standing with Sarah in the same spot where they'd had their first real conversation about grief and healing. Do you think Victoria would approve? Sarah asked, leaning against his shoulder. James was quiet for a moment, watching Emma and Lily play in the garden that had brought them all together. I think Victoria would love that her daughters have a mother who fights for them the way you do. I think Holly would love that you found a way to be happy again. And you? Sarah asked. Any regrets about marrying the nanny with the complicated past? James turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. My only regret is that it took us 6 months to get here. We could have been a family the day you walked through our door. As they kissed again under the stars, surrounded by flowers they'd planted together and children they both loved fiercely, James realized something profound. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about finding your first love, but about finding your forever love in the most unexpected place. Their family had been born from loss, but it would grow from choice. The choice to love completely, heal together, and build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. In the garden around them, night-blooming flowers opened their petals to the moon, and somewhere in the distance, a butterfly spread its wings and took flight, carrying with it the promise that beautiful things could indeed happen after the deepest sadness. The impossible had become possible, and love had found a way to bloom again,